Hey, happy Friday. Welcome back to another Friday Tech Workshop. I'm Joseph, a senior developer advocate with Appsmith, and in today's workshop, we're going to build a dynamic confirmation modal. Now, Appsmith already has a built-in confirmation modal that you can enable for any API or query. It's easy to just turn on that toggle setting, and then it will present the user with a confirmation before they can run that particular API or query. However, the message text and the button label, they're not editable. So if you want to add your own custom message, you have to add a separate modal and connect the button to that particular API or query. And that's pretty easy to do, but if you have a lot of different APIs or queries that you want to use a confirmation on, it becomes difficult to maintain a separate modal for every single one. And then if you want to adjust the styling, you've got to do it on a bunch of different modals. So today we're going to build a dynamic modal that's driven from a config object. So you can pass in the name of the function to run, the message, even like an icon and a color. So all of those will be driven from this config, and then you can use the same one modal to run any action, any API or query, or even bundle those into a function and group a bunch of different APIs and queries together with a single confirmation. All right, let's check it out. All right, first I just want to go over the regular confirmation method. So I've got a table set up here, 3 different tables actually, and each one has a delete button. And then if you look at the queries here, each one of these delete queries has the request confirmation before running API turned on. So if you just enable this setting, this button that's directly running that API, it's going to call up this modal first and give the user a chance to cancel it. Now, you cannot customize the text, not the message, not the title, or the button labels. You could rename the API to make it a little more clear about what it's going to do, but that's it. You can just rename the query itself. So if you want to make this dynamic and show a different message or show details about the row that's being deleted, then you have to add your own modal. And that's pretty easy to do, but it gets tricky when you want to use the same modal for different APIs. So that's what we're going to do today. Again, the normal method, it's simple. You just enable that setting. But if you want to have a custom modal and to use that same one for a bunch of actions, what we're going to do today is set it up to feed that with a config object that lists exactly what API to use, what message to show, even like an icon and a color. So we'll start out with just the basics of making it dynamic, and then we'll add in those extra details to just give it some more styling with the icon and color. Now, I'm going to start out with making a copy of this page, and then we'll just build on top of this. And I want to refactor these 3 delete buttons so that instead of using the default confirmation, we're going to call up our own modal. Now, first what I'll do is copy this page. And we'll just call this one dynamic. All right, and then I'm going to disable the confirmation on all 3 of these queries because we're going to use our own. So just to avoid seeing 2 different modals pop up, first thing I'm going to do is just disable all those. All right. And then each one of these buttons, right now they're still tied to that API, but now there's no confirmation. What I want to do is show a modal, but also pass in some data and feed that modal. So instead of having this button directly open the modal, I need a function that runs and takes the incoming data as a parameter, loads that in so that the modal can display it, and then open the modal. So let me go ahead and add a modal first, just so we have something to reference in the code. And then we'll have some text here where we're trying to display details about the record that's being edited or deleted. But when this modal gets called up, I need to bind this to something. Now, I could say table1.triggered row or contact table or companies or users, whichever table it is. I could take data from that triggered row, but then it's only going to work for that table. So to make this fully dynamic, we need a central place. Instead of pulling from each individual table, we can use a JS object variable, and we'll just mutate that variable every time before the modal opens. So I'm going to add a new JS object, and we'll start out with modal config is going to be a variable that is an object with, we'll have a action, like what are you trying to run, what API. So this will be probably like delete user, delete company, one of these API names. So we'll use delete user. And then on top of the action here, we're also going to want a message to the user. And then lastly, we want the actual row, details about that row that's being edited. And so this is going to be an object that triggered row from one of those three tables. But this is just a placeholder. So this is the structure that I want to use when I pass in the parameters. But it's just a variable, a placeholder, so I can mutate this. And then once it's been populated with some values, then we'll open the modal. So then I'll have this time we'll have a function to open the modal. And the first thing that we want to do is take the config that was passed in. So this show modal function will take a config, and we want to use that to update this, the modal config, inside this variable here. So this modal config equals the config that was passed in. And then whenever this function gets ran, it'll update this variable so that we can display that in the modal. And then we'll open the modal. Show, open modal or show? All right. And so this should first update these values and then open the modal. And that's it. That's all that you have to do on the first half of it to present the confirmation. When they click the confirmation, that'll be a different function. So at this point, we just want to open the modal and have it populated with some data. So let's go back to the UI here. And I'm going to bind to that data now. So here we'll use JS object 1 and go to that modal config. And then we'll have details from the row. So there's a row object that we're going to pass in, and it will have a name field from the company or the contact or the user. Right now, there's no name because we have not populated that yet. But we have a place to display data from that variable. So the last piece of this now, to populate it, right before the modal opens, what we want to do is call that function with some parameters. So I'm going to change this first delete button. We'll do the contact table first. And right now it's running that delete query directly. So we'll just get rid of that, start over with the on-click action here. And I'm going to change it to JS mode so I can just type all my parameters right here. So I want to run this function now to show the modal, passing in an object, and then we'll give it that same signature that we defined a minute ago. So there's an action, and I want to delete a contact. Okay, and then we're also going to have a message. And then lastly, the row that's being affected. And so in this case, I can use the triggered row because this table has a dedicated delete button. So this delete button will always use the triggered row from this table, table contacts. So the triggered row, the entire object, will get sent to this show modal function. And And then the modal, it's always displaying the data from that modal config. And so that modal config gives us a central place to merge the data from the 3 different triggered rows. So now when I click this button, it should open up the modal here, and it's populated that object, and now we're pulling from that object to see the name here. So we can do the same type of binding right here. We'll use that for the message. So that instead of coming from the row, it'll just be the modal config.message. And now we're passing in the message and the some details about the row. Now, in this case, I'm taking the name every time. The next table might not have a name field, so that's just kind of another layer of making it dynamic. If you want, you could use something like the JSON path library or a templating library to extract data from the row and dynamically pick a certain field. That's a little overkill for this. I just want to show how to use a single modal to run multiple actions. If you want to make it even more dynamic and pick out different fields by name, go for it. But today we're going to focus on how do you make this confirmation button run a different action every time. So we have a dynamic message. That part's pretty easy. Next, what I want to do is make this confirmation button run a different action based on the data that's in that config that we just created. So in that config, I have the action name. I said the name of the query I want to run. But think about what you want this button to do. It's going to delete the record, but then you won't see it in the table unless you run the get request to repopulate it. And the modal's still going to be in the way. So even if you do refresh the get request, the modal's still open, right? So every instance of this is going to have a different function where you want to delete from a certain endpoint, contacts or companies or users, and then run the get request for that endpoint, whichever table you're on, and then close the modal. So what I'm going to do is write 3 sets of functions that wrap around those sets of APIs and close the modal. And then we can dynamically call one of those on this button. So we have our kind of default signature here for populating that modal config. This mutates it, actually sets the values that we want for this instance, this time of using this modal, and then it opens it up, and that's it. So then when the user clicks that confirm button, we're going to have 3 different functions to confirm deleting a customer, user, or company. So for this first one, I'll do confirm delete company. And so the first thing would be to just await running the GET request. So this needs to be async. Cannot type today. Inc. All right, and then we'll await delete company. After it's deleted, then we want to get the request, get the new companies. And then lastly, just close the modal so that you can see it. All right, and then we're going to have 3 versions of this. So I'm just going to copy this a couple times, and we'll make this one. Let's see, we got company, then we'll have contact and user. Okay, this one, want to delete a user and then get the users, and then close the modal every time. And here we got contact, delete, contact, and get contacts. Okay, so we've got these 3 different functions now that will handle the button click to delete a row, update the table so I can see all the rows, and then close the modal. Now to make this dynamic, it turns out it's really easy because of the way that we store code in JavaScript in Appsmith. Inside of a JS object, everything is a key value pair. You know, it's rather than saying const modal config equals object, it's just modal config is a key, and then here's the value. And same with functions, you don't type the colon, but this is the key, and the function is the value. And because of that, you can use the bracket notation to dynamically access these functions. We can say go to JS object 1 square brackets and then dynamically pass in the name of a function and be able to run one of these from that button click. So the first one we're working on is company. I'm going to grab this company delete or confirm delete company. This is the name of the action. So like here, I was just saying delete user as a placeholder. This action needs to be the name of one of these functions here. So taking this name, and right here, we're going to run one of those three functions by name using the value that's in that action. What I need to do is actually back up a step here and populate that with the right value, because right here it was just delete contact. So are you sure you want to delete the company? We're on contacts here. I'm getting them mixed up. So we're on the contacts one. We'll do confirm delete contact. Contact. Okay, all that's contact. So this button will set the modal config object, but it won't change anything else yet. It's just updating that value. And then this button, it should run the function with the name that's right here. So to do that, we'll go to this confirmation button here, turn that to JS mode. And now we want to run a function that's inside JS object 1. And if I was running the function explicitly by its name, then I could just say confirm delete contact like this. But this part here, we want to pass in a variable. So instead of the dot notation, we're going to put this in square brackets, get rid of the dot. And then the value right here, this name, this is also inside JS object 1. It's a little weird, but we're kind of nesting two different references to JS object 1. So we'll go to the modal config action here. And now I'm able to take the name of the action, find that function in JS object 1, and then run it because it has the parentheses here. So if I run this, it should actually delete the row, and we have confirmation turned off now. So it should go through and do everything. Delete the row, refresh the table, and close the modal. So we can see this row in the background here, Hardy. Let's see what happens. Okay, and there it is. So that row's gone. The next thing is that we have to go to the other two tables and make that same edit on the delete button. Okay, so we'll just copy the signature that I used here to call the function and then just change that one little piece. So copying this on click for the delete button of the contact table. We'll go to the company table here to its delete button. Again, we're no longer going to call that delete query directly. We just want to open the modal with some extra parameters here. And so this one is confirm delete company. And then you also want to pass in the correct triggered row. So this time it's coming from this table companies. There we go. And so this time it should delete a row from this table. Looks like we got everything there. The action is company, the message, and the triggered row. So let's try this first one, Jenkins. Okay, so it populated the modal with the right message and the right user. And then the delete button, or the confirmation button, rather, this part's going to stay the same. This is already done. So we have to do the table delete button to open the modal 3 different times and give each one a different config object. But once that config object is there, this part stays the same. It's just running the same function, or or rather going into the JS object one and running a different function by using the value in that action. So let's see if Jenkins deletes here. Okay, cool, that one worked. So last thing here on the user table to finish this out, just like we did on the last one, we will delete this action and then just change this over to JS, make a couple edits here for users. And I think that's it. So the last user here, we'll try Celine. Okay, it's preloaded, showing user, and delete. And that is it. So that's how you can build a dynamic modal. This is going to save you a lot of time, especially down the road when it comes to maintenance and styling. If you decide you want to change this header here or the styling or anything about it, it's a single modal now instead of a different one for every single API. So we got the basics working, got a little bit of time left here. So what I want to do is add some extra styling and just make this look a little nicer, and maybe kind of like when you show an alert, there's a success styling, then there's like the warning or the error styling or info. And so I want to give this kind of a similar feel with an icon and color. And so I'm going to start out with an icon button here. And the cool thing about the icon button, or just about any widget property, is you can control it with JavaScript. Instead of it being explicit of what icon you want here, I can just switch this to JS and say, get the icon from the modal config. So we'll go to JS object one dot modal config, and I'm going to say dot icon, even though it's not there yet. So we need to start adding that when we pass in the modal config. Same with the color. I'm just going to do it while I'm here, even though that value doesn't exist yet. And then we'll populate it here in a second. So JS object one modal config, and then we'll say dot color. And now if we go back to, we'll have to do all three of the buttons. But if we go to this delete button here, we can pass in a icon, and we'll say trash. And then color is red. And in this case, all three of them are going to be the red trash can icon, but it's totally dynamic. If you wanted to make these a little different for each table, you could. But I'm just going to copy this piece, add it to the other two delete buttons here. All right. So we should see the trash can icon and the color. And then if I wanted to change this to, I don't know any of the icon names. Let's just try circle. That should be one. And there it is. So you could have a different color for, warnings or pop-ups that are just info for the user. And then if it's actual editing data or deleting, then you'd want to use red or whatever. But this will give you a way to make all that dynamic. Again, if you really wanted to make this part dynamic up here and reference the data and say, are you sure you want to delete the username? You could do that using JSON path, and that is one of our suggested libraries right here. So if you go to the libraries icon, the cube, and then the plus here, one of these in the suggested list here, I'm pretty sure it's in here, JSON path. So this will make it easy to dynamically say, get this value from this object using this name, and then it's not locked to always using .name, because like right here, this is somewhat dynamic, but it's relying on the row object having a name. If there wasn't a .name, then this part wouldn't work, right? So you could do that with JSON path, or actually with Lodash. We have Lodash built into Appsmith, and there's a get method, which will do something similar. You can say, here's an object, here's a path, get the value at it. So I think that's it for this week. I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions on this one or ideas for future workshops, feel free to drop a comment below. Thanks again for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next week.